with the tools that we have. Now, in this talk, I assume you all are aware of a version control system, preferably Git. If you use something else, the stuff I want to show you in a second may or may not work, or you need to change a few things here and there. But I guess Git is like the de facto standard these days. As I just said, focusing on these non-functional requirements, monitoring them, keeping them in sight, this requires constant work and constant checks. So we need to do things constantly all over again. Now, Git being a distributed version control system, it's not easy to have like a central instance technically there that would run all these checks in a certain way. I mean, yes, there are CI pipelines, GitLab CI, my personal favorite. There's GitHub Actions. There is Bitbucket pipelines, or however that's called. So they monitor your Git instances or your Git repositories, and whenever a change happens, they would run then some scripts that you set up. And that's cool, but that happens way too late, right? So you want instant feedback when something goes wrong so that you can instantly fix things. Luckily, Git has covered us, and there is an implementation in Git called Git hooks. So these are events that are emitted, and you can write scripts that listen on these events and then just do stuff. Thing is, it's not that easy in a plain Git setup to manage these hooks, to keep them current, to make sure that every developer on the team has them installed and uses them. So there's definitely room for improvement there. Luckily, a lot of developers have us covered. So in basically every language on this damn planet, there is at least one Git hook manager implementation out there, even for PHP. Actually, there are dozens. There are different ones. The one I prefer personally is this one, Captain Hook. And I give you, let's say, 3, maybe 4 good reasons, and just a funny one, why I do like Captain Hook. First of all, I think the name is spot on. I mean, how can you not name a Git hook manager Captain Hook? That's nearly impossible. Sebastian, the author of Captain Hook, does a pretty good Twitter game using the pirate stuff. That's really fun. Second reason, and that applies to me personally, I do know Sebastian Feldman quite well. So if I have any problem with Captain Hook or I want to see a new feature in, I'm not saying I get fast lane access, but I can get things going in a good direction. Let's put it that way. The third reason why I like Captain Hook is that it's relatively close to the Git hooks, so it's very low level and super simple to configure. So it's just a basic JSON file that you need to put in the repo, and then you can define anything there. The fourth good reason, if I did not miscount, is that it's super easy to hook in any kind of CLI script, so you don't need any glue code or whatsoever. So that's pretty cool. And the bonus reason number 5, is that its Docker support is top notch. And I have an example later how to configure that. So if you want to install Captain Hook, it's super simple. Just compose a require Captain Hook / Captain Hook. There is an additional package that you can install, Captain Hook plugin composer, which will hook in the composer lifecycle and make sure every time you run composer install or composer update, it will check if the Git hooks are installed, and if not, reinstall them. So that way you can be quite sure that the hooks are active. Yes, you can still figure some sneaky ways to not execute them, but let's say if you're using these two dependencies, you've done the best to make sure that everyone on the team is using the hooks. If you've done that, Captain Hook, if it's run for the first time, will ask you a bunch of questions, set up like a couple of defaults. It can validate your commit messages, check files for syntax errors and stuff like that. So you can mix and match and get started quite quickly. This is the basic configuration file that's the output. As I said, JSON file. It will just list all the different Git hooks that are there, and you can define those actions. That's what it's called. So basically, all those CLI commands or PHP classes that should be executed. Like in this case, we define a pre-commit hook that just says, okay, whenever this pre-commit hook is executed, just run PHP unit on the files, run PHP code sniffer with a Magento code standard. That's as easy as it gets. As I said in the beginning, Captain Hook and Docker, that's an awesome match. That's a bit more configuration needed, but it runs perfectly fine. So you need a config section. You need to set the run mode to Docker. You need to pass a command that would spin up the containers and run the commands in. I'll just show you in a second how that Git hook script looks in my case. You need to point it to the Git directory in the Docker container. And this is super important. This took me like 2 or 3 hours of debugging to figure out like why Captain Hook did not work in Docker, because I did not mount the .git directory per default in the containers previously. So it was just sitting on the host because I felt I don't need it in the Docker containers anyways. Obviously, if you want to run a hook and you want to figure out like what's the latest Git commit and stuff, you do need this .git directory in your container. And the last part is the run path. It just points to where the Captain Hook binary is located in the container. So that's then the one that is executed and then will run your commands. And then, as before, you just need to point it to the tools that should be or that need to be executed. You may or may not need to deal a bit or to test a bit like which path is the right one to use. Like in this case, I had to prefix it with an HTML folder because the working directory in the container was www, and the sources were installed in the HTML folder. So I had just to append that to make sure that Captain Hook finds the binaries. Now the bin git hook bash script looks like this. First, we make sure to spin up the PHP FPM container. And then we just execute the command within that container. So that's basically it. The pretty damn cool thing about this is when you don't have the PHP FPM container built already, Docker will do so, and it's totally not a problem for Git or Captain Hook. So it's okay if it sits there like 5 to 10 minutes until everything is built. It will just spin it up and then execute the commands. I did this once on purpose, maybe, kind of, and it just worked flawlessly. That's pretty cool. Another cool thing that you can do with generally a Git hook manager is this. Let's say you're working a project in a big team, everyone does changes frequently. You pull the changes, the latest ones, and you try to run the application, and it fails because of missing dependency. And guess what? Apparently, you have forgotten to run composer install to install the latest versions of dependencies. So technically, you need to remember every time I pull, I just should run composer install. Now, why not automate this? Why not let Captain Hook do that for you? Now, there is a post-merge hook which runs whenever you pull, whenever you merge, and it will just then execute these commands. Cool. So every time I pull, it will run composer install. It will run Magento setup upgrade, which does some database magic. It also runs Magento setup DI compile, which just generates hundreds, thousands of generated PHP files. That will take a while. And that might be annoying if you just quickly want to get the latest versions from the server to be able to start developing, and then you need to wait for like 10 minutes until these steps are done. Wouldn't it be really cool if, for example, Composer would only run if we would figure out that there are actually changes in the Composer JSON and the Composer log file? I mean, that would be cool, and that's exactly what you can do with Captain Hook. You can define conditions for such an action. Like in this case, say the condition is, did any of the files change that are listed as an argument? So we just run composer install whenever composer JSON changed or when the composer log file changed. If there isn't a change at all, we just skip that step. That is super awesome. I mean, even with Composer 2, which is super fast, it's still, or might be a bit annoying just to wait until the install is done. For the Magento commands, it's a bit more tricky because you would need to take several files into account and the relationship and whatnot. So that's not that easy to figure out if you need to do an upgrade or not. So it might be best to run these steps manually if you think that these are needed. So now that's a good baseline. So we have the tooling in place that we can run tools that inspect stuff or do stuff on a constant basis and remind us as early as possible when there are problems. Now, let's move on to the next tool, and that's PHPStan. That's kind of my favorite when it comes to static code analysis. I know there are a couple of alternatives. There's Psalm, there might be others. I tried them a long time ago, and they kind of did not really work for me due to whatever reasons. I felt PHPStan worked the best for me, and to be honest, I do really like its tagline, find bugs in your code without writing tests. Because I'm not saying I don't like writing tests, but if I can write less tests because of PHPStan, that's definitely a plus. Now, how do you install it? Well, super simple, composer required, phpstan/phpstan. And then you can run the analyze command past directories that should be analyzed, and you get a potential output that looks like this. So in this case, it checked the controller admin HTML manage restore PHP class, and it figured out we access a store manager property somewhere, and that's not initialized at all. So this is a potential problem, and you should figure out how to fix that in whatever way. When I showed these, when I showed PHPStan in my Mage Test Fest presentation, there were a couple of Magento developers in the audience, and let's say I sparked a bit of interest with them, and that led eventually to making PHPStan be included in Magento 2.4. That's pretty. So I kind of consider this my contribution to Magento. They might see it a bit different, but I don't care. There actually is a little downside that comes with Magento being Magento and such a long-term project and having such a huge code base. Obviously, you can't go all in and set PHPStan to the max level to detect every possible problem and have the Magento team fix it. That would probably take years. So what the Magento people did is they initialized PHPStan with level 0, which is like the lowest version to detect issues. So we find a couple of problems, but obviously not all the interesting ones. What you do find is things like that. So if a method should return something, but there is a return statement missing, so okay, that's a cool check. Are there any access to constants on unknown classes? Are there access to undefined constants at all? Is there access to an undefined property somewhere? Do anonymous functions have unused use statements? Does the arrays have duplicate keys somehow, somewhere? And do you call undefined methods in your code? So these are really basic checks. They help, that's cool, but you can definitely do more. And when I was back home from the conference, I thought, okay, now I sparked interest in that, and there is a lot of stuff going on in Magento that covers some magic parts. Let's put it that way. I really would like to set up a PHPStan Magento extension and to play around with it and see what I could do to support this Magento development with PHPStan even more than that. And back at that day, I wasn't aware that the Magento people would include PHPStan actually in the 2.4 version. So I did what we developers do. I just created a project, BitExpert PHPStan minus Magento, and that covers a few of these things and adds a bit of functionality. You can enable that again as a pre-commit hook if you want to. Just run PHPStan analyze. You need a configuration file. You do need to include the PHP Stan Magento extension configuration. That's the line at the very bottom of the screen. You do need to set up a bootstrap file and autoloader, because we do register a couple of autoloaders to do some magic stuff. And then you just define the paths that need to be checked. And you can easily go to level 7 in Magento modules, where you have like your own private space, and you can move things in a way that PHP Stan would like things to be. Let's put it that way. So what does the extension do? First of all, we added a class generator for factoring proxy classes. So basically exactly what Magento is doing. We kind of like duplicated that, but made it a lot simpler, just so that PHP Stan is aware of these factory and proxy classes. We have a class autoloader for, I just called them mocked classes. So basically, let's say some classes in Magento core or some dependencies, they are not optimal for PHP Stan because doc blocks are wrong or return types are wrong and things like that. So that's not relatively easy to fix with PHP Stan. So I decided to copy those classes over, make some adjustments, and the autoloader just checks if that specific Magento implementation class is available locally in the PHP Stan Magento extension project, then it will load this one instead of the original Magento one. So that was like the easiest fix I could think of. Downside of this is in the evolvement of Magento, things change, and we need to adapt those changes then to these mocked classes. So ideally, those need to be ripped out of the PHP Stan Magento extension and be maintained separately. But for now, I just thought, okay, it's just a side project from mine. I don't give a damn if things break or if you use it with a super old version of Magento that I don't really support. Anyway, so we also added a test framework autoloader. So the test framework stuff in Magento, that's loaded a bit differently. So we had to fumble this a bit in. But even those classes can be used. We added type hints for the object manager. So when you create an object via the Magento object manager, you'll have all the typing information available, and PHP Stan can examine that and figure out what's going on. Besides that, we added support for magic method calls. So Magento has this famous data object class, which has a lot of the underscore get set and unset and whatever methods. So we added support for that as well. I also want to try out the PHP Stan rules. So Magento has a couple of rules implemented. One is called service contracts. The other one is called collections should be used directly via a factory. That basically means you can't or you should not call certain methods on certain objects, and we check that. And if there's a violation, you get an error just to fix that. So all in all, that's pretty cool, and that's extremely helpful. Up to this date, I think we have like 180,000 downloads already. So it seems like there is use for it in the Magento community. Now, if you are a first-time user of PHP Stan, I would like to point you to a tweet by James Titcomb, his PHP Stan pro tips. If you start with PHP Stan, start with level 0, fix the basic issues. Once you're done with that, once you've fixed all the issues, just increase the level, fix the next round of issues, and so on and so forth, and just repeat it until level 7 or max or whatever you want to use. For bonus points, you can install the strict rules of PHP Stan to give some more interesting things to fix. And yeah, he says, I can pretty much guarantee you will find some bugs in your code in this process. I totally agree with him. It was the same like moving from PHP 5 to 7 and activating type hints. You get so many errors all over the place where you think this code could never run, but I know it did, and I also know the test it passed, so I have no idea how things are working. You will learn a lot in this process. And again, if you don't know what PHP Stan can detect, things like this, You can have missing type information in the PHP doc comment. This is something that that PHP stain can detect. It can figure out, hey, I'm calling this get canonical rule function and I'm passing a variable to it that is a string, but it potentially also can be null. But the method expects a string to be a string, so potentially you can run into an issue, and you would need to check if that's cool. And you could also figure out things like that. Hey, you're calling this add index method, and you invoke it with 4 parameters, but the function declaration says you should either pass 2 or 3 parameters in. So there definitely is a mismatch, and you should check this out. So these are all the problems that you can detect. The second one is really interesting with passing strings and nulls and stuff, because I think 2 months ago, Magento had a bigger issue because in one of their dependencies, the strict mode was enabled. And there was like one place in the Magento code where they thought they pass a string to a method of this dependency, but it appeared that not always was a string passed. It was an object or it was null or whatever. And then the type hinted code, the strict typed code, just like blew up and it errored out. I kindly pointed out that this problem could have been detected with PHP stan. I'm not saying there was some reaction in the Magento crowd, but I just couldn't let go of that. I just need to have fun anyways. Cool. So this is PHP stan. That's cool. Static analysis done. Well, not really. I have another static analysis tool for you, and that's called deptrack. The difference is that deptrack does not focus like on the code itself, but rather on the different layers and the different the interactions between layers that should be there or should not be there. You can download deptrack from GitHub. It used to be developed by the Sensio Labs Germany people. I think they rebranded last year to some other company name that I just forgot, but I'm pretty sure you'll find that. If you run deptrack init the first time, it will generate a default configuration file. You can configure the paths that should be checked, files that should be excluded, and then layers and rule sets. Now, for the sake of this presentation, we assume this is like the module structure of the Magento module we are dealing with. So we got a bunch of directories on the root level node, API block, controller, helper, model, plugin, and so on and so forth. Now let's define a couple of rules. Well, before we define the rules, we need to define the layers. So we define a layer called controller, and we say put all the files that reside in the controller directory, connect them to this layer controller. All files that are residing in the helper directory should be connected to the helper layer. All files that are located in the repository directory should be connected to the repository layer, or should be part of the layer. Now let's define some rules. We can say the controller layer is perfectly fine to access the helper layer and the repository layer. The helper layer is perfectly fine to access the repository. The repository layer is able to access actually none other layer at all. So that's the bare minimum isolation that you can do. Okay, now we'll run deptrack against the files, and this is the output. So it does its magic, analyze the dependencies, figuring out like which files belong to which layers and how they interact. And then it figured out, okay, we have this repository class, and on line 42, the code depends on a helper. And based on our rule set from before, that is not possible. So repositories should not depend on anything else. So that's then a problem that you should fix so that it applies to your configuration of deptrack. Now, when I demoed this at Mage Test Fest, I had in mind to check with DebTrack the dependencies of Magento modules that you develop in your application, because PHP being PHP and IDEs being IDEs, I can create dozens of Magento modules in my project, and regardless of let's say visibilities or dependencies, I can technically instantiate any class. So let's say I have module A and module B, I can easily instantiate a class of module A without defining a dependency in the Magento specific configuration. And that can potentially lead to problems. So you might want to check that just to make sure. Now, it turns out people got a bit inspired by this and figured out, okay, but we can also check the dependencies within a Magento module. And Fabian Schmengler from a Magento agency here in Germany did exactly that. So he modeled the dependencies, let's say the basic dependencies of a Magento module. Technically, things are way more complicated because Magento has so many things in its repertoire where you can like override methods, add logic, just has its own AOP layer where you can add in hooks before or after a method call or around it. If you would add all that in this diagram, that would be impossible to visualize and come up with the necessary rules. You can try, but I guess that's really a tough task. But at least you have an idea what you can do with that. So that's a pretty neat tool. Next up, some Composer praise. Who of you loves Composer? Just write it in the chat. Who loves Composer? Nobody. I am disappointed. I am disappointed. Okay, at least one. Thank you. Cool. So just a couple of cool things you can do with Composer. There's a Composer validate command that not that many people know. What it does is it will check if the Composer log file actually matches the composer.json file. If it does not, you will get this error saying, okay, the log file is not up to date with the latest changes in composer.json. You better should run composer update. Why is this a problem? Well, if you make changes to composer.json and then run composer install on production, it will check which dependencies are referred to in the log file and then install maybe the wrong ones. And you definitely want to avoid that. And guess what? You can run this command with Captain Hook quite easily. You don't need to run composer validate. You can just use one of the implementations that is coming with Captain Hook. So there's an action called check log file that, again, you can run as pre-commit hook or a pre-push hook or whatever, because you really want, in this case, to fail fast and fail early, because if that is in your Git repo, then things probably go south. So let's check that. Just quickly make some modifications locally, git add and commit the fabulous fixed typo commit. Captain Hook runs and it will just say, okay, wait a minute, the composer log file is out of date. Go figure what you want to do with that. Cool. So that's a pretty neat thing. Another thing that you keep in mind that is you may want to be aware of dependencies, composer dependencies that you do not use, and uninstall them, because obviously the more dependencies you have, the more the possibility is larger that there is some error or some problem somewhere that you don't know. And still today, I mean, there are still applications deployed online where like the vendor folder is publicly available, so you could browse the files that are there and just figure out like, okay, there's some fancy test script that I can use as an exploit to access the server or whatnot. So really make sure that that you have just the composer dependencies active that you are using. As a bonus, things will probably also load faster. So there's a tool that is called Composer Unused that you can download from GitHub. Just run it. It will load all the packages that are defined in Composer.json and then scan all the classes in your project. and then figure out like which classes are used, basically then which packages are used and which not. So you can, like in this case, see we are using PHP. Okay, that's probably not a surprise. We also use Magento Framework, Module Backend, Module Custom, Module Store, Module UI. So we don't have any unused ones. So that's cool. Another thing that you might want to keep in mind when it comes to composer dependencies is licensing issues. Obviously, devs are devs, and when you hop on packages, you just see any kind of package that you're interested. You just compose required, and you're done. But maybe at least when you're working for customers or when you're working for your company, you should definitely be sure to understand licensing issues, and that's like a topic on its own, obviously. So you want to make sure that only valid licenses or libraries with valid licenses are installed and used. And I recently found this cool by the Made with Love guys from Belgium. It's called License Checker, that you can also simply compose a require. You can run it, generate the configuration, so it just go through all the dependencies that are defined in Composer JSON, check their license information, and then just spit it out in the .allowed licenses file. And then you can edit it, remove the ones that you don't like or don't want to see, and then you can run license checker check, and it will then check if the allowed licenses configuration matches the ones that you have defined in the composer dependencies. Now it's pretty cool to have in your CI workflow, just to make sure you don't have any issues. There are a couple of commercial solutions out there. The one that I definitely like and admire is VersionEye. Basically for two reasons. One, I do know the founder, and second, he's from Mannheim. They have relaunched VersionEye 2.0 last autumn in a silent relaunch. They completely rewrote everything from scratch and made it a lot faster. That's pretty cool. Sadly, they don't have like open source support active currently, so you need to pay for each license check. So if you would use that for your open source work, you need to figure out like how to do that. That's why I prefer this license checker tool, at least right now, for our public GitHub managed open source stuff. Cool. So we got the composer stuff sorted. Maybe swinging back a bit again to code. Or to test specifically. And I don't want to waste too much time on that topic, because I did a talk for you people back in, I think in January, covering infection PHP. So this just like quick wrap up. On the one hand, now we know that our code is in, let's say, good conditions, because we do all the abstract the syntax checks and whatnot. Question is now, how good are our tests? Do they recognize problems early on, or what's the case? So how good are our tests? And this is where mutation-based testing comes into play. The basic idea is that mutation-based testing will take your code, will make some minor changes, run the tests against the code, and then figure out if the tests fail or not. So the idea behind of this is, since code and tests are tightly interwoven, whenever you make a small change in code, you technically need to change the test as well. If you don't do that, then the test might not properly detect those changes that you did in the code. Show what I mean. So let's say you have this Magento method do search. We pass in a search criteria, pass this to the search helper, which then returns a response. If the response is empty, we throw a not found exception. If it's not empty, we return the response. In this case, some JSON response. Cool. So when Infection PHP, the mutation-based testing framework, sees this code, it will change the if empty check to if not empty, meaning that all your unit tests that expect the exception to be thrown will figure out the exception is not thrown and fail. And all your tests not accepting the exception to be thrown will fail because an exception is thrown. If they would not recognize this, then there is a high chance of probability that your test is not good enough to test what the test should test. So how to install infection PHP? It's shipped as a FAR dependency. So you can download it from GitHub. Again, just run it. The first time it will ask you a bunch of questions. Where's the source files? What files or directories to exclude? Where's your PHP unit configuration? Stuff like that. And then when you run it, it will first run the initial test suite. It will generate the mutants, the variations of the source code, and just run the test against the source code. So the bottom part of the screen, that's quite closely to what PHP unit looks like, and it will just show you the killed, escaped, uncovered, and fatal error mutants and stuff like that. And afterwards, just present you with a nice overview of statistics, like how many mutations were generated, how many were killed, not covered by tests, and so on and so forth. Now, thing is, for small projects, infection PHP is super fast. The larger the project gets, the more tests you have, it can be very slow. So it might be a problem if you would add infection PHP as a pre-commit hook, because it just takes too much time. You can work around that, and what I usually like to do is to add it as a pre-push hook. So I can commit like crazy locally, and then like every couple of hours push it, and the push then will take a bit longer. So I just can grab something to drink or whatnot. So that's usually fine for the projects I've been working on so far. You can speed things up in a different way, and that is running infection P only for changed files. And guess what? I wrote a Captain Hook plugin for that, Captain Hook Infection, that you can install via Composer. Add the PHP class as an action, or to your action configuration. You need to pass the infection CLI call, basically how to call it with what PHP interpreter and so on and so forth. Pass some arguments if you want to, and it will then check the commit, the current one, figure out like their PHP files changed, like these are the 4 files that have been changed, pass those as a filter to infection PHP, and then infection PHP will just run against those files. This is also pretty good if you, let's say, if you're using or if you're working in a legacy project and you really want to ignore all the thousands of potential problems. You just want to focus on your current work and then make sure that this is in a good state, and then move on, fix other stuff, and then again focus on that part, and not care about the other thousand issues that infection PHP may potentially find. Cool. So that's it from my side. Thank you very much for listening. Are there any questions? Okay, there is a question chat. Does infection Captain Hook extension also detect the infection JSON configuration? That is a very good question. It should, I would assume, because I'm just launching infection PHP as a parameter. I haven't checked that. I need to do that.
Yeah, I mean, congratulations on mentioning infection. I mean, go infection.
Team infection,
Yay.
which is probably, oh, wait, this is probably not the best thing to say in a pandemic. If you get the
Well, in this session, we will discuss it twice, because I will mention infection as well. So, so it's good to say. Keep me posted on whether or not this works, because like I mentioned offline with you, I am using Grum PHP, which is developed by PH Pro company here in Belgium, also Magento shop. But it doesn't have this functionality for providing these more or less very extended extensions. So I'm curious to see if this works.
I think Andreas Heikel actually made a Captain Hook plugin that would then also execute Grum PHP. So if you're really interested in combining both, that might be an option for you then. So you could benefit of both.
Yeah. Automate everything, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Just throw all the things in a project and see what's happening.
Well, I'm looking at the chat. The deep track.
Yeah, that was not mentioned by my coworker. That was mentioned by a guy from Symphony Labs Germany. So
Okay.
totally not affiliated. I like that guy. We know each other, but that's like all I know.
You are in Germany. He's in Germany.
Yeah, exactly. You are in Germany. That's a German guy. You need that. You work together, right? That's
Yeah.
not.
I mean,
That's not how it works. Just kidding.
yeah. So yeah. Well, if no one has any further questions, let's take a what's the time? A 10-minute break. I presume it was saying. Let me quickly check. 15 minutes. So 10 past the hour. We will be back, and then I will do the presentation on chaos and resilience testing and all the other cool stuff. So looking forward to it. Well, thank you, Stefan. It was again wonderful to have you here, and feel free to
You're
hop
welcome.
in anytime.
Sure, I'll do so.
Will you stick around also for the open session after this meetup?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe
Why not? Yeah.
to have some discussions with other people. I see.
Sure.
Maybe there will be some interest in having open discussions about Magento and quality and CI/CD, all the stuff that you know. So
Absolutely.
all right. See you all at 10 minutes past the hour, and then let's get ready for chaos. Okay. One minute to go. We should be. I see one person being added here. So. Okay, let me quickly see. Yes. Okay, we're supposed to be good. Okay. So looks like I'm next. So I will start sharing my screen. Why is it not sharing the other screen? No. Okay. So I need to exit full screen and move this over here. There you go. Let's make it full screen so everyone can see. There you go. Let me quickly move the other one to the other side so I can keep an eye on it. Like this. Okay. So, welcome. Today I'm going to talk about chaos engineering, also known as resilience engineering or failure engineering. And normally it should come. So that was REM from way back, but they were already announcing the end of the world, and today we're going to see they were not far from the truth. Quick vanity slide. I'm a senior PHP architect, co-founder of Into IT. I'm a community leader at PHPBenelux. That's why I'm here. I also coach children at Coda Dojo. I used to be a digital nomad, being able to work wherever I went, but nowadays this is my home, my office, my work area for the past almost 2 years. So, and I like a lot of coffee. So if you see me sipping, it's because I enjoy that brew. Enough of me. Chaos engineering. The idea is what could possibly go wrong. So when we look at a chair, you see a normal chair. Most people think, hey, I can sit on it. I look at it and I go like, okay, how can this chair be broken? And of course, a chair, if it's not fitted correctly, it falls apart. Maybe you have a colleague or someone in the family who's a prankster, and they saw off parts of the legs. It could be set on fire because it's a wooden chair. If it's an old chair, it could potentially have a lot of termites or other infectations. The ceiling can drop on it. Strangely enough, it occurred at my son's school. Fortunately, the kids were having a day off, but the chair was broken when the roof came down. Of course, when the roof comes down and maybe the house collapses on top of it. I've seen lately landslides taking place, and they take the whole house and of course the chair that's in that house away. And if you really go bananas, yeah, well, maybe aliens, they destroy the planet and the chair is also broken. And that's the theory of chaos engineering. You look at an object, either in the physical world or in the digital world, and you ask yourself, what could possibly break this piece of code? Of course, the moment you pull in aliens, it's game over in like nanoseconds, so don't worry about those. But everything else could have an effect on it. Of course, we look at Wikipedia for the definition of things, and when I look at it, it has a lot of words in it, um, but I find it too complex to actually explain what's the purpose of chaos engineering. So I highlighted some of the important parts, and when I fold it together, I get a very nice introduction to chaos engineering. Chaos engineering is experimenting in production to withstand turbulent and unexpected conditions. And I think that is the main focus of today. So, in other words, unleash doom on your applications, on your libraries, on your contributions to open source, maybe your finance spreadsheet. What could possibly go wrong? I could explain all the academic theory, but I rather have our own hard lessons that I want to share with you because we were not prepared. We didn't think ahead what could possibly go wrong, and we faced the music in a bad way. So I will share our pains, and hopefully it will help you think about actual things that can go wrong, and knowing this might help you prevent it for yourself. So in September 2009, we had a power surge, and that destroyed all our hardware. What was happening? There was a brief power outage, and when the power came back on, there was a surge in the voltage and immediately destroyed all the hardware. We have circuit breakers like most people have. They were not able to withstand that enormous surge. I don't know how much they pushed through the wires, but everything that was in a power socket was broken. So what were our constraints at that point? Well, the devices, especially the hardware and the utilities I have to use for my work, they had retail grade power sockets, and they had some sort of a surge protection, but were not efficient handling enormous surges. Also, I purchased an UPS system to protect the home office server, and it did not prevent any capacity overflows in other devices. So what did we actually do? Well, we called in an electrician, and we had the whole office rewired with built-in professional power surges in the power sockets. So not only at the circuit breakers, but also on each socket where devices are being plugged in. We also spent a lot of money for a UPS upgrade that could support not only the hardware like printers, phones, and so on, but also all the network connections that go through it, and make sure that if there is a power surge that jumps over onto the network wires, our devices are still being protected. So that was 2009 was also the year that we founded our company. So that was not really a nice introduction into starting your own business. For those who were on the clouds, April 2011 is still a moment that everyone remembers, because AWS went down, and of course everyone else was going down too. So I don't remember exactly what was the cause of the outage, but it was down for a week. And because AWS was the most popular cloud service at that point in time, many other services were using AWS. And when AWS went down, all the other services were not accessible as well. And even though we're not using AWS ourselves for cloud operations, we used a lot of these services hosted on AWS. So even if you're not an AWS customer yourself, but you're consuming a lot of services, chances are that those services are run on AWS. So when AWS goes down, your services are no longer available. I do remember that there was no information given by Amazon, and also no information was given by our service providers, because we're not AWS consumers, we're service customers. So we called the services, and they had no clue what was going on. To give you an idea, we had our CI/CD on a service, and if you're doing development, and CI/CD is important, having an outage like this one, it blocks your daily operations. So we moved the most critical services on our own data center, and we made sure that everything is being replicated. So in a configuration, we can just switch from the online services to our own services in the case that we need to. So March 2012, server goes down, and everything was inaccessible. What was the fact? Our server was on a heavy load. Logs were filling up very quickly, and we got an alert that we had less than 20% of disk space. Unfortunately, the alert, because of all the operations happening, was delayed. So by the time we received the alert, it was already too late, and we were not able to SSH into the server because there was absolutely no space left. What was the basic problem there? Well, the logging occurred on the same server as the application, and monitoring was on a different server, but they were behind the same switch. So when there's a lot of traffic, you're not actually able to see the monitoring because the pipe was already filled up, and even though we see the graphs blocking, we could not see why it was blocking, and we couldn't see that the disk space was ramping up that quickly. So we set up a centralized server, moved the monitoring to a complete different hosting provider, and we added mountable storage. So if we see that we have a capacity issue, we can mount more disk space onto the server and move the log information out of it. Or in the case that we have a lot of transactions taking place on the server, we can have additional file storage added to that server if we have to. For those who were in Belgium in 2013, our national ISP, not number one, but number two, had an internet outage. Now, if you're doing online business, whether it's development or sales or marketing or whatever, if you don't have internet, you're dead in the water. And we had no internet for 14 hours. And on top of that, we had deadlines to deliver. and QA and deploy tools were all online. So even though that we had moved a lot of these on a different data center, we were still not able to connect with it. Because it's a major ISP in Belgium, I could go to McDonald's or a bar in the city, or I could go to any public Wi-Fi place, but they were all using that same ISP. So I had no alternative location to go to. So nowhere in the area there was internet. And this is why I decided to have like a mobile hotspot in the office. And it's using a SIM card from a competing internet provider. So in the case that the internet drops, I should be able to switch over to the mobile hotspot, and I can immediately reconnect and continue the business. Well, I think this is closer to home because we're still right in the middle of it. So the pandemic, a viral infection sickens and kills people globally. China, Korea, Italy on lockdown, and eventually Belgium and the rest of the world went in lockdown as well. The Belgian government advised us to keep a good hygiene and avoid unnecessary human contact. And all the events all over the world were cancelled. What was the main constraint? Well, businesses were not ready for working from home workforce. I heard stories about people actually pulling screens from their sockets and tower PCs or desktop PCs, taking them home because they had no alternative way to do work from their home. And even though, like PHPBenelux, we try to come up with an online event, having in-person event is still, more interesting because it's not just the content that you get, but you also get in touch with the sponsors. You can interact with some of the vendors of the products that you use. You can have that dialogue that is very hard to get the same vibe if you're doing this online. Adopting a remote first mentality in a company, school, hobby group, event organization is a solution. But how far can you go with this, and how well does it work for all the employees? Is your organization ready for this? Can it handle a distributed workforce? Those are all challenges that still need to be figured out and to be solved. We'll get to another challenge a few slides from now, where we will actually need to think about having a work from home kind of mentality in organizations. 2021 started very well because in January, supply chain attacks, and they're still ongoing. If you haven't seen the news, Accenture is the latest victim of attacks, apparently ransomware, but also some supply chain of Accenture tools and those kind of things. So what is a supply chain attack? A successful compromise of source code used by many other applications. So if we look at the presentation of Stefan, he was pulling in packages with Composer. So even though Magento itself is safe and secure, by pulling in a package that is not as safe and secure, you can actually create havoc and have a supply chain attack, because Magento depends on that particular broken package. SolarWinds, CodeCov were some of the examples. But it's not just the high organization kind of applications. Open source is also targeted. We had PHP tried for supply chain attack. Python, Ruby, they were all actively targeted for supply chain attacks. And if you haven't seen any suspicious email, you either haven't paid attention and clicked on a link and the perpetrators are inside your network, or you have a really low profile, and keep it that way, because I get like 3, 4, 5 active phishing campaigns constantly on my machine. I use Mud at this point for email, just to make sure that I don't have something automatically trigger a malicious code or something like that. So what are the constraints? Well, a breach in one component impacts all the dependencies of that project. It's very hard to detect, because this supply chain attack is provided by a trusted source. And in the case of SolarWinds and CodeCov, they actually had the signatures that match up the code base, because the malicious code was already in the code before it got signed. So everything looks fine, everything is okay, it's trusted, let's pull it in, and the perpetrators are taking all your files and encrypt it, and then come after your bitcoins. I suggest that if you're a developer, use MFA on all the things that you use, email, but also your GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, whatever. Commit sign with a certificate or with a GPG key. Keep that GPG key on a hardware token like the YubiKey, and have a library management, monitoring, and alerting using the tools that Stefan showed on. Are there violations on particular libraries? Maybe even think about signing up for packages, the commercial version or Santis, so you can actually have the safe libraries in your own environment, and you pull in the new packages on a remote system that's detached from your code and your applications, so you can have like security scans on top of it before it actually enters your your code base. And then, of course, now floods, wildfires, apparently it's still ongoing. So the effect of climate change will affect everyone, and this is the reason why working from home will definitely have an impact on the climate, because you don't commute at that point. So if everyone stops commuting, we have less pollution in the air, and things might get better. I'm not saying it's going to solve all the problems, but one step at a time, it will definitely help some parts. Well, what happened? Parts of Eastern Belgium, the Netherlands, and West Germany were flooded, including some data centers. So if you actually had your applications or your business, your virtual business in a data center in the impacted areas, you have a problem, because those data centers were not accessible anymore. Same happened also with the wildfires in Eastern Europe, US, and Canada. It caused issues for the networks, because fire breaks the connections, and of course the data centers were also evacuated and not operational at that point. So there is no access to your data center because it's not reachable. Also, your backups are not accessible because they were kept in the data center. Rebuilding the infrastructure is very hard when you're not using infrastructure as a code. So even though you can purchase a new environment in another data center that's still operational, rebuilding the infrastructure, if you don't have it in your repositories, it's going to be very painful to get back into that base state that you need to be. And of course, your data is not available because your backups are still not there. So if you really are afraid that your systems are not available, and that will cost you a lot of money if they're not available, think about having multi-regional replication of your applications. You can keep your backups in your data center, but keep them also in a different place, like a different data center or even on-prem. And I cannot emphasize on making sure that you can recreate your whole infrastructure with all the applications and tools and configurations using an automated fashion. Use infrastructure as code, Terraform, Ansible, Puppet, Chef, whatever is your flavor of the day. Use it, build it, and make sure it's operational. Because if this thing breaks, yeah, you're dead in the water. And if you're using Magento, you're losing customers if they're not able to purchase on your website. So I think these experiences have taught us that we need to be prepared for chaos. And what can we say? Well, first of all, Netflix is a huge inspirer on this because they had Chaos Monkey. They actually made chaos engineering hip and trendy. And their motto is, don't wait for the chaos, create it. And if you can do it during office hours, so everyone is at the office, they can work on the issues, solve it. And when something does occur out of office hours, at least you have a trained team of people that know how to handle these kind of situations. What you can do as a team, you observe what happens, you learn from the failures, and you come up with remediation efforts. Sometimes, yeah, it cannot be fixed because, let's say, if your database cluster is gone and you have no alternative, yeah, well, you need to spin it up again. But if, for instance, the disk is over capacity, having a mounted volume that you can attach would solve that problem. So depending on the situation, you can have remediation efforts in place. I have depicted 4 areas of building resilience. Well, we went through it, but the network, the infrastructure, application, and of course humans have a major impact on where things can go wrong and how you need to remediate that. Well, what can go wrong with networks? Well, if there is no internet connection, you cannot do your operations. But maybe you have an internet connection, but you have no IP available. Still, same problem. Latency and timeouts, I consider them moderate because even though it's slow, it's still better than having no connection at all. Wrong or bad encryption certificates, I consider that a major issue. You can still say, okay, I ignore failures on validation of the certificates, but I would not recommend you do this, especially because of the last item, man in the middle attack. If you don't validate your certificates, you don't see that someone sits in between and poses as though they're the legit service, but they're actually reading every piece of information that comes through it. Well, your infrastructure, hardware can fail, hard disks break, your laptop, you spill coffee on top of it, it's no longer functional. You might have resource overload, like I mentioned, the power surge that went over it. Maybe bad configuration app, public versus private. Oops, I published a GitHub repository publicly, and it contained keys. And of course, active hacking and exploits. If your hardware is old and still contains hard-coded credentials, as they did back in the day, and you cannot alter them. Yeah, malicious people on the internet are actively looking for these kind of devices, and they break into it. Your applications, tight coupling of services is what I consider a crucial thing, because if one of those services is not responding or has a problem, your whole application crumbles to a halt. So you want to have that loose coupling between your services. A service-oriented architecture can solve this problem, or if you really want to go hip and trendy, you can go microservices, but it's not essential for providing this kind of facilitation. Bad coding practices. It's not because it's bad code that the application can break. It could be, but it's not saying that it does. But it also provides like an entrance for malicious actors to exploit the bad coding practices to their advantage and get back in. Same goes also for bugs and vulnerabilities. Bugs are, yeah, you need to fix them, especially vulnerabilities. Make sure that these are fixed as quickly as possible. But besides the fact that a hacker could exploit those, yeah, you miss out a little bit of information, but it's not really effective on the whole system. Not being able to disable compute in dense parts. The famous recommended products, or your friends also purchased these items. These are very compute intense components in your e-commerce system. If you have no way to actually enable and disable them with one config setting, if something goes wrong and you need all the compute power just to keep the system up, yeah, having that feature available is very convenient. And of course, active hacking and exploits. So always check CVE records and scan your code for potential exploits. Human challenges, bus factor. That's the number one challenge that you have to deal with. If only one person on the team has in-depth knowledge of part of the system or the whole system, and nobody else can figure out what this person is doing, yeah, you have a problem. Because if something happens to this person, or this person decides to leave, you could potentially lose up to a 6-month period of additional work trying to figure out what's going on. Also, try to prevent a single point of failure. If one person commits a failure in the code, don't let this person solve this. Look at it as a team. If I refer to the Toyota Kara, make sure that you triage the failure as a team, and gain team knowledge why this was a failure and how to prevent it in the future. Of course, diseases and strikes can have an impact. Insider threats, involuntary data breaches. I'm not saying that people are maliciously sending emails with everyone in CC, but it happens, and sometimes personal information or very sensitive information gets shared this way. Also, staffing and contracting, especially now with everyone getting vaccine shots. I now also see recruitment people asking if people are vaccinated. Be very careful when making that request, because GDPR and health information privacy are still a thing. It's not because we have a pandemic that you can demand anything from people. So be very cautious about that. So how can you remediate this? Well, first of all, you need to monitor. Monitor everything. If it moves, track it. And track it just in case it makes a run for it. Dave Eggers has this book, The Circle. It's also a feature film with Emma Watson and Tom Hanks. And there's a quote there: knowing is good, but knowing everything is better. Which is, in the case of your system, your environment, really, really essential. What can you monitor? Well, the usual suspects, but maybe you also want to have a comparison of the total logins versus successful logins and compared to the failed logins, so you can see if there's like a password spraying attack going on. Maybe you want to have global ping times to know how fast your site responds over the world. Maybe you want to keep track of the database query times, those kind of things. So there's a lot of things that you can monitor. Start slow, do the usual suspects, disk space, CPU, memory, and then add more to it as you go along. There are plenty of tools out there that help you provide this telemetry to a gazillion services that provide monitoring for you. But you need to start with monitoring and keep on adding more and more information to that monitoring system. This is a Grafana dashboard. You can put it in your office. You can have it on a tablet, but make sure that everyone has visibility to this application, so we can keep track of the outliers in the system. So what are the principles of chaos engineering? Well, you can read a lot more on principlesofchaos.org. There is a organization for this. But you build a hypothesis around steady state behavior. So what is your baseline? And you look at it and you start creating hypothesis from that state behavior. You can have real world events like the ones I listed, maybe your own experience, and in worst case, you can always pull in ET just for fun. Run experiments in production. Why? Because it has the load, it has all the data sets, it has all the components that might not be replicated in the other environments that you have. Also, once you have created experiments, automate them so they run continuously, but focus on one thing and do one thing at a time. So minimize your blast radius. Don't go like full speed and disable all the things, because things will break and it will be very hard to get things up. One advice from me: start with a dev or test environment to at least figure out how your system responds, even though it does not have the load. But look at it from an observer perspective. Observe what happens, figure out what needs to be done to solve this, and then replicate this into acceptance and production systems, just to make sure that you don't break things and it takes a lot of time to solve those breakages. How can you test network failures? Well, if you have a ISP connection in your office, just unplug the master power switch. Configure route tables to non-routable gateways. Set your DNS to 127.0.0.1 and localhost. For the more tech advanced folks, simflood the network in the office and see what happens. Create a BAT SSL TLS certificate and attach it to your database, to your Redis instance, your MongoDB, or your website, and see what happens. Observe what happens. Are you getting notified that there is a BAT certificate in there, and so on? How can you deal with infrastructure failures? Well, if you look at the IT crowd, have you turned it off and on again? Well, if you switch off the power, things are not working. So see how your infrastructure handles this. Change credentials for services. So if you're having API keys, rotate them and see what happens if that rotation is not pulled in from a repository or something. Turning off or destroying services. Destroying service mean if you have like containers, destroy the container and see if something is noticing this destruction and start spinning up a new instance. Removing payment instructions from service providers, especially when it's close to payday, especially having monthly cycles. It's not that easy, not that hard to get some people very, very anxious. Changing configuration in production and make services public and see what happens. Don't do this with very sensitive services. Please, please, please do not do this. But if you have like backend services for public static websites, put them also public and see what happens. Most of the time people can see the AJAX calls anyway, and see if it makes a difference. Well, your application, put it under constant stress. See what are the upper limits it can handle. Where is the application showing cracks where you can deal with it. This is also part of testing, providing wrong values for forms and API calls. One of my favorite, disabling JavaScript and CSS. Nowadays, 99% of the internet stops working. Constantly running your automated penetration test. If you haven't looked at tools like OWASP, Zap, or other tools like that, I cannot remember the name. You can have them analyze your application and run the detections in an automated fashion. So they basically continuously try to penetrate your application, and it's a good way to see if you are capturing low-hanging fruit that script kiddies could find, just to make sure that at least you're protected against those those tools. One of my favorite is switching configuration. So move the database connection to the storage and vice versa. Always fun to see what happens. The human aspect is a little bit more difficult because you're dealing with humans. One of the best ways is to have a social engineering team come to your office and start doing some tests with people. But if you do not want to have those people exposed to these mind tricks, you can do tabletop exercises. It's like a Dungeons and Dragon type of exercise, but more business and application oriented or infrastructure oriented. Extract data from your systems, score their sensitivity, know where the sensitive parts of your applications are, or if your data is, and try to protect it as much as possible. Provide internal workshops, certification programs, and have people switching roles. Let a project manager become a developer for a day or a week, and have the developer become a database administrator for a week, and so on. Have people switch roles just to understand what's involved with the other part's role. I'm not saying that they need to do all the jobs, but at least experience what it is to be on that seat. What about data? Well, assume breach always. You cannot trust your data, even if you have correctly filtered input and escaped output. Yeah, your data is as corrupt as it can be. You just don't know it yet. Less is more. The less data you have, the better you are protected against loss and corruption of that data. Let me put it this way. If you don't have it, it's hard to steal or lose it. If you have data and it's not touched in about 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years, put an expiration date on it and remove it after that expiration date. I also have some tools and references. Well, the Chaos Kitchen here, we use Gauntlet. It's a very nice tool to automate most of these things. PHP Fever is a tool we've created here to put your application under constant stress. Stefan already mentioned Infection, the PHP mutation testing framework. Testing your test is also a form of resilience testing. Of course, you have the Chaos Toolkit and Pumba. They are great tools. Have a look at them. There's probably a nice tool for you in there. Of course, the open source tools that we constantly use. PHP Unit, Behat, Fabricator is our replacement for Atlassian suite. We use OWASP, Z-Attack Proxy, ZAP. We use Docker, Kubernetes, Ansible, Terraform. And then for monitoring purposes, we have Prometheus and Grafana. And here are some books. I will share the link to the PDF later on. If you click on it, it's an affiliated link. I get pennies for it. If a lot of you click on it, I get lots of pennies. So I won't get rich of it, but it will make my kids happy if I can give them €1 just from the internet. So that's it. I am now ready for some questions. Let me end my sharing here and move this up here so I can see what's going on. QA. Do we have QA mode? Yes. When customers notice the test in production, yes, I will not lie to you, especially if it's your first production breakage. Your customers will know. Does it chase away customers? Potentially. If you do this not during peak traffic, impact might not be that big. And of course, you have prepared for this in the other environments as well. So you know what's coming, you know what's going to happen, and you're just tying up the loose ends to make sure that you got this covered correctly. So if you're doing this very well, your customers will not notice it because you have remediation already in place. If there's still a piece of information missing in the other environments, they might have some visibility into the problem. But also the idea of chaos engineering is that you remediate fast and quickly, or you stop the process and you go back and figure out, okay, what went wrong, how can we resolve it, if it takes, let's say, more than 10 minutes. Yeah. Okay. All right. I don't know what was funny, but I guess it was funny. Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, then I go back to the presentation, because there's always this. Oh yeah, I forgot to update the feedback. Sorry, Stefan. It was a long week for me. I forgot to put joined in, but I will provide the link later. We will have an open discussion session after the prizes and the announcements. So feel free to join us. We have a room big enough for everyone. It's a free discussion. Everyone can speak, no moderation. Keep it polite, and we'll have a good time. You can ask questions to me, you can ask questions to Stefan, or have a discussion about something completely off topic. All right? But now we have raffle time. Where are they? Well, I don't know where they went, but I know I have them here. But I clean up my whole office, so we have two elephants to raffle, one blue one, one pink one, and let's start the raffle. I will be sharing my screen again. Allow. Move this one over. Okay, so these are all the names I collected. And if you entered a little bit late, I'm sorry. Let me just quickly double check the names. Okay. Putting Jelmer in there. Yeah, Paul is from our group. I don't see Peter Packet. Okay, I think I have everyone. So the deal is, I will spin the wheel. Your name will be chosen as a winner, and we will provide you the details. Just send us an email so we have your email address, and we will send you the details that you can provide for shipment. And we're all GDPR compliant, because at the moment that we receive notification that your shipment has arrived, we delete your data because we don't want to have it to be stolen. So, who, Mark? Did I miss one? Mike. Yes, good. Thank you. All right. Let me do a quick check again. All right. We are going to spin the wheel for a blue elephant. Mark. I just want to ask Mark, do you have a blue elephant, or you want me to spin again? Okay, spin again. Can I remove you? Okay, let's spin again. Because Mark already donated elephants to us, so he probably has the blue elephant already. Stan, you win a blue elephant. Congratulations. Let me just take a quick screenshot of it. Marco Han, congratulations. You win the pink elephant. So, unfortunately, I don't have any other gifts to give away. If you have a company and you're still stuck with swag from the conferences that never occurred, feel free to contact me, meetup at phpbenelux.eu, because I'm running out of swag and I would love to raffle more stuff. So if you have books that you want to raffle, if you have stickers you want to raffle, let me know and we'll put it in here. Okay. I will put everyone now in the open session rooms, and we gonna have a nice conversation until we're tired of it, and then we break apart. So can I do an all? Let me see. Drag and drop. Yes. So everyone there?